The scream echoed through the cosmic void as darkness itself took form. Ancient civilizations didn't just fear their gods. They trembled before deities who embodied pure malevolence, chaos, and destruction. These weren't the benevolent protectors of humanity. These were the architects of nightmares, the bringers of plague, the consumers of souls. From the serpent that threatens to devour the sun every night to the demon god who created death itself. We're about to journey into the darkest corners of human belief. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient mythology. Because the most terrifying truth is this: across every continent, every culture, every civilization that ever existed, humans agreed on one thing. There are forces in this universe that want nothing more than to watch us suffer. And they gave these forces names. Angra Mainyu, the first devil. The ancient Persian Empire, long before Islam transformed the region, worshipped a dualistic religion that would forever change how humanity understood evil. In the blazing deserts and towering mountains of Persia, the prophet Zoroaster introduced the world to Angra Mainyu, known in later texts as Ahriman, the destructive spirit, the first true personification of absolute evil. Unlike other malevolent deities who were simply angry or vengeful, Angra Mainyu represented something far more terrifying: evil as a cosmic principle, a fundamental force woven into the fabric of reality itself. According to Zoroastrian scripture, before creation began, before matter or energy or time existed, there were only two forces separated by an infinite void. On one side stood Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, embodiment of light, truth, and order. On the other side lurked Angra Mainyu, embodiment of darkness, lies, and chaos. These twin spirits emerged from the primordial nothing, and each faced a choice that would define the nature of existence. Ahura Mazda chose to create life, beauty, and order. But Angra Mainyu made a choice that would echo through eternity. He chose evil, not because he had to, not because he was ignorant or corrupted or forced. He chose evil because he wanted to. Ancient texts record his declaration with chilling clarity. It is not that I cannot create anything good, but that I will not. This wasn't a fall from grace like the Christian Lucifer. This wasn't corruption by outside forces. This was pure, conscious, deliberate rejection of everything good in the universe. Angra Mainyu looked at the possibility of creation, love, truth, and beauty, and he said no. He chose destruction, hatred, lies, and ugliness with full knowledge of what he was doing. What made this choice so cosmically significant was what followed. Angra Mainyu didn't just stand aside and let creation happen. He created counter-creation, a mirror world of death and decay designed specifically to corrupt and destroy everything Ahura Mazda made. When Ahura Mazda created fresh, life-giving water, Angra Mainyu poisoned it with salt, creating the bitter seas. When Ahura Mazda brought forth life, Angra Mainyu introduced death as an inevitable conclusion. When humanity learned truth, Angra Mainyu whispered lies in their ears. For every act of creation, there was an equal and opposite act of destruction. Persian mythology describes Angra Mainyu's physical form as an immense dragon or serpent, a creature of such size that his body could coil around the entire world. Some texts suggest he appeared as a massive storm of insects, flies, locusts, vermin, that would consume everything they touched. Others describe him as pure darkness given shape, a void in the form of flesh that absorbed light and hope and life itself. But his true horror wasn't his appearance. It was what he represented and what he created. Angra Mainyu gave birth to an army of demons called devas, each embodying a different vice, a different form of corruption. There was Eshma, demon of wrath and violence. Akamana, demon of evil thoughts that poison the mind. Indra, who represented apostasy and rebellion against divine order. Sorva, demon of tyranny and oppression. Nayanhadia, demon of discontent and ingratitude. Each demon served as a specialized weapon in Angra Mainyu's war against creation, infiltrating human consciousness and physical reality to spread suffering. The cosmic war between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu defined Zoroastrian cosmology. This wasn't a metaphorical struggle between good and evil. Zoroastrians believed this was an actual, ongoing war happening on multiple planes of existence simultaneously. Every natural disaster was a battle won by Angra Mainyu's forces. Every plague, every drought, every famine represented his corruption spreading through the physical world. Earthquakes were the tremors of combat in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. Storms were the echoes of divine warfare manifesting in weather patterns. But here's what made Angra Mainyu uniquely terrifying to ancient Persians. He was winning. Zoroastrian prophecy declared that Angra Mainyu would rule the world for 9,000 years, bringing war, famine, disease, and death before his final defeat. During this reign of darkness, he would distort the very laws of the universe, making suffering the norm and joy the exception. Pain would become more common than pleasure. Death would come easier than life. Lies would be more believable than truth. The world itself would become a reflection of his evil nature. Persian priests didn't worship Angra Mainyu. That would have been unthinkable, blasphemous. Instead, they performed elaborate rituals to protect themselves and their communities from his influence. They maintained sacred fires that burned continuously, representing the eternal light of Ahura Mazda that kept darkness at bay. They recited prayers designed to strengthen the forces of good and weaken the forces of evil. They performed purification ceremonies to cleanse anything Angra Mainyu's influence had touched. Their entire religious practice was essentially spiritual warfare against a cosmic entity that wanted them dead or corrupted. The Zoroastrians understood something profound about evil that later religions would struggle to articulate. Angra Mainyu wasn't subordinate to Ahura Mazda. He wasn't a fallen angel or a rebellious servant. He was evil's equal partner with good, locked in eternal combat. This dualistic theology posed the most disturbing theological question humans have ever faced. If an all-powerful, all-good God created everything, where did evil come from? The Zoroastrians answered, evil didn't come from anywhere. It chose itself into being from the moment existence began. Angra Mainyu's influence spread far beyond ancient Persia. When Judaism evolved during and after the Babylonian exile, Jewish theology absorbed Zoroastrian concepts, transforming the adversarial angel Satan into something more like Angra Mainyu, an embodiment of evil rather than just a celestial prosecutor. Christianity inherited this development, creating the devil as cosmic opponent to God. Islam's Iblis similarly bears marks of Angra Mainyu's influence. Scholars trace the entire Western concept of absolute evil, of a malevolent force that opposes divine good, back to the Persian conception of Ahriman. What the ancient Zoroastrians understood, and what their mythology of Angra Mainyu expressed, was this: evil is not the absence of good. Evil is the presence of something that consciously, deliberately, enthusiastically opposes good. It's not darkness as the absence of light. It's anti-light, something that doesn't just fail to illuminate, but actively consumes illumination. And this force, according to Zoroastrian belief, was as old as creation itself, would exist until the end of time, and was working every single moment to corrupt, destroy, and ultimately unmake everything that lived. Apophis, the serpent who hunts the sun. In the scorching sands of ancient Egypt, where the Nile carved life through desolation, the greatest fear wasn't death, it was eternal darkness. Every night, as Ra, the sun god, descended into the underworld on his sacred boat to complete his daily journey, he faced the most terrifying enemy imaginable, Apophis, the chaos serpent who sought to devour existence itself. Egyptian priests didn't just fear Apophis. They performed rituals every single night to ensure the sun would rise again, because they genuinely believed that without these rituals, without their magical support, Ra might lose the battle and darkness would reign forever. Apophis was no ordinary monster. Ancient texts describe him as a serpent of impossible cosmic size. Some accounts claim he measured over 50 feet in length, his body as thick as ancient oak trees, scales gleaming like polished obsidian. But other texts suggest something far more disturbing, that Apophis was infinite, his body coiling through dimensions of darkness that humans couldn't comprehend, his true size beyond measurement because he existed partially outside the physical universe. He was the void given shape, entropy with consciousness, uncreation with intent. His eyes possessed a hypnotic power that could paralyze even the gods, freezing them in terror as his massive jaws opened to consume them. Those who looked directly into Apophis's gaze reported seeing their own extinction reflected back at them, experiencing a preview of non-existence that drove some mad with existential terror. His scales weren't just armor. They were made from solidified darkness, impervious to weapons, because they existed in a state between matter and void. Unlike most Egyptian deities, Apophis had no temples, no priests, no worshippers, only enemies. You couldn't pray to Apophis for favors or make offerings for his blessing. He represented uncreation, the primordial chaos that existed before the universe took form. When Ra organized chaos into the ordered world, separating land from water, creating time and space and causality, Apophis became the living embodiment of everything that wanted to return to that original void. He didn't just want to destroy creation. He wanted to make it so creation had never happened, to restore the infinite nothing that existed before existence itself. Every sunset marked the beginning of his hunt. As Ra's solar boat entered the underworld, navigating through 12 dangerous hours of darkness, Apophis would attack. Egyptian mythology describes this battle repeating nightly, an eternal struggle between light and obliteration. The underworld through which Ra traveled wasn't empty. It was a vast, dark realm filled with dangers, and Apophis was its apex predator, waiting in the deepest darkness for his prey. Apophis's primary weapon was more terrifying than fangs or venom. He possessed a magical roar that created absolute darkness, extinguishing all light, all hope, all existence. When he opened his mouth, darkness itself poured forth like liquid night, drowning the world in void. His roar wasn't just sound, it was anti-creation, a force that undid reality. Witnesses who survived hearing this roar described it as the sound of the universe screaming as it was unmade, a sonic manifestation of extinction that echoed through multiple dimensions simultaneously. His gaze could hypnotize Ra and his crew of protective gods, leaving them helpless as he coiled around the solar boat, attempting to crush it and devour the sun god whole. Imagine the scene, Ra's boat drifting through absolute darkness, its divine light the only illumination in an infinite void. Then the darkness shifts, moves, takes shape. Apophis emerges from nothing, his coils wrapping around the boat, constricting, squeezing. The gods aboard frantically chant spells, slash with divine weapons, call upon their powers, all while feeling the boat's timbers creak and splinter under pressure that could collapse dimensions. Egyptian mythology records the tactics of defense in detail because priests studied these stories to support Ra through ritual. The god Set, himself a deity of chaos and storms, stood at the boat's prow, using his immense strength to battle the serpent. Set understood chaos intimately, and he used that understanding to fight Apophis in ways other gods couldn't. He would speak the language of disorder, confusing Apophis, creating temporary weaknesses in the serpent's cosmic form. Cat-headed gods would slash at Apophis with divine blades that existed partially in the spirit realm, weapons forged specifically to harm beings like Apophis who straddled the line between existence and void. Magical spells would be recited to weaken the serpent's power, binding words that temporarily constrained infinite evil into finite form. Sometimes Ra himself would use his divine speech to command the serpent to retreat, speaking words of creation that reminded Apophis what he was fighting against. These words of power weren't just sounds. They were reality reshaping itself through vocalization, creation magic combating destruction magic in a war of opposing concepts. But here's what made Apophis truly nightmarish. He could never be truly killed. Egyptian texts describe him being cut into pieces, dismembered by divine blades, his body destroyed and scattered. They describe him being burned in divine fire that could consume anything. They describe him being bound in chains forged from impossible materials, trapped in magical prisons designed by the wisest gods. And yet, every night, Apophis returned, whole, healed, ready to attack again. This immortality wasn't regeneration. It was something more fundamental. Apophis existed as a concept as much as a creature. He was chaos itself given serpentine form. As long as creation existed, chaos existed as its opposite. As long as there was order, there was disorder trying to reassert itself. Apophis wasn't born. He emerged from the first moment Ra created order from chaos. The shadow cast when the first light appeared in the primordial darkness. During solar eclipses, Egyptians believed Apophis was winning, temporarily swallowing the sun. These events caused widespread panic throughout Egypt. Work stopped. People hid in their homes. Priests performed emergency rituals at temples across the kingdom, chanting ceaselessly until the sun reappeared. The thought that one night Apophis might succeed, that the sun might not rise, that eternal darkness might finally triumph, haunted Egyptian consciousness with existential dread. Their entire civilization was built on preventing this catastrophe. What made Apophis especially horrifying was his army. Ancient texts describe legions of demons serving him, creatures of darkness that would swarm Ra's boat, trying to slow it down so Apophis could strike. These weren't mindless monsters. They were intelligent, strategic, working in coordination to end creation itself. Some would attack the oars, trying to prevent the boat from moving. Others would assault the gods directly, forcing them to defend themselves rather than attack Apophis. Still others would attempt to extinguish Ra's divine light, the illumination that kept the boat visible and navigable in infinite darkness. Egyptian magical texts provide specific spells priests would recite to support Ra during these nightly battles. They would chant descriptions of Apophis being defeated, speaking these victories into existence through sympathetic magic. They would create clay figurines of a serpent and ritually destroy them, symbolically wounding the real Apophis through magical correspondence. They would write the serpent's name on papyrus and then burn it, attempting to burn the actual creature through destroying its written representation. This wasn't primitive superstition. This was sophisticated magical theory, suggesting that symbols and reality were connected, that affecting one could affect the other. The priests understood they were fighting a war that could never be won, only maintained. Apophis would exist forever, attacking forever, threatening creation forever. But as long as the rituals continued, as long as the magic was performed correctly, as long as Ra had support from both gods and mortals, the sun would rise. The battle would continue. Creation would persist another day. And tonight, when darkness fell again, they would perform the rituals once more, supporting Ra through another journey through the underworld, another confrontation with the serpent who embodied the universe's will to return to nothing. Kali, the mother who drinks blood. In the dense forests and crowded cities of ancient India, where spirituality and terror walked hand in hand, emerged a goddess whose very name meant the Black One. Kali, the Dark Mother, the destroyer of demons, the goddess who wore a necklace of severed heads and a skirt of dismembered arms. But to understand Kali's terrifying nature, you must first understand she wasn't simply evil. She was necessary darkness, the violent force that protects by destroying, the surgeon who cuts away diseased flesh to save the patient. Hindu mythology tells of her birth during a cosmic crisis that threatened to destroy all of existence. The demon Raktabija had become invincible through a terrible curse. Every drop of his blood that touched the ground would spawn an identical demon. As the gods fought him, they watched in horror as thousands of Raktabijas multiplied across the battlefield, each as powerful as the original. Cut him, and blood would spray, and from each drop a new demon would emerge. Stab him, and the wound would bleed, and the blood would hit the earth, and more Raktabijas would spring forth fully formed, armed, ready to fight. The multiplication was exponential, overwhelming, unstoppable. In desperation, the gods turned to Durga, the warrior goddess, already known for her prowess in combat. But Durga understood that conventional warfare couldn't defeat Raktabija. She needed to become something more, something terrifying enough to face this impossible enemy. Hindu texts describe what happened next as a transformation, so profound it created a new aspect of divinity. Durga furrowed her brow in concentration and rage, and from her forehead emerged Kali, not born but manifested, fury given form, the embodiment of destruction with purpose. What emerged from Durga's forehead wasn't a benevolent mother goddess. It was rage incarnate. Kali appeared on the battlefield with coal-black skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her wild hair flowed like smoke from a cremation ground, never still, writhing with its own life. Her tongue hung red and dripping, lolling from her mouth in a gesture that combined bloodlust with a cosmic gesture of absorption. She would consume all evil, drink all corruption, devour all that threatened creation. She had 4 arms, each holding a weapon of destruction, a curved sword dripping with fresh blood, a trident that could pierce multiple enemies simultaneously, a freshly severed demon's head still dripping ichor, and hands positioned in mudras of both fear and blessing. Her eyes blazed red with divine rage, not blind fury, but conscious, directed, purposeful destruction. Her laugh echoed across the cosmos like thunder, a sound that made demons flee and made gods uncertain whether to feel relief or terror. Kali's solution to the Raktabija problem revealed both her terrifying nature and her cosmic purpose. As she battled the demon, cutting him with her sword, she did something no other god had thought to do. She opened her mouth impossibly wide, her jaw unhinging like a serpent's but far larger, her maw expanding to cosmic proportions. And she began drinking his blood, every single drop, before it could touch the earth and spawn new demons. Ancient texts describe the battlefield transforming into a nightmare as Kali consumed the blood of thousands of demons, her appetite for destruction insatiable. She didn't just kill Raktabija, she devoured his essence, his power, his very possibility of regeneration. She cut and drank, moving with supernatural speed, her sword flashing and her mouth consuming in a rhythm of destruction that was almost beautiful in its efficiency. But the story takes a darker turn that reveals why Kali truly belongs among the most wicked gods. After destroying all the demons, after drinking every drop of Raktabija's blood and killing every clone, Kali couldn't stop. The taste of blood, the ecstasy of destruction, the pure power of death itself, it consumed her consciousness like a drug. The battle rage that had made her effective became all-consuming. She began dancing on the battlefield, her feet crushing corpses beneath them, her laugh shaking the heavens. The other gods watched in horror as they realized Kali might destroy everything, not just demons, but the entire universe. Hindu mythology records what happened next with disturbing, vivid detail. Kali danced across the cosmos, her wild dance of destruction called the Tandava, threatening all of creation. Her feet struck the earth with such force that mountains crumbled. Her arms whirled with weapons that cut through the fabric of reality itself. Her laughter drove some minor gods insane. She was drunk on destruction, intoxicated by death, unable or unwilling to distinguish between demons who needed killing and innocent beings who didn't. In her blood rage, everything became a target. Everything became something to destroy. In desperation, Shiva, her husband and one of Hinduism's most powerful gods, threw himself beneath her feet. Various versions of the myth provide different details, but the core remains consistent. Shiva lay down on the battlefield, covering it with his body, so that when Kali's foot came down in her wild dance, it would strike him instead of the earth. When Kali realized she was dancing on her beloved's body, she stopped, but not immediately. Some versions say she took several more steps before recognizing him. Others say her foot hovered above his chest for long moments, while she struggled internally between rage and recognition. When awareness finally returned, when she understood what she'd become, her tongue lolled out in shock, shame, and horror at what she was doing. This image of Kali standing on Shiva's body with her tongue extended became one of Hinduism's most iconic and disturbing representations. It captures the moment when destruction recognizes it has gone too far, when necessary violence transforms into unnecessary evil, when the protector becomes the threat. But here's what makes Kali truly fascinating and terrifying to understand. She's still worshipped devotedly by millions, not as a demon or evil goddess, but as a mother, This paradox reveals something profound about human psychology and the nature of divinity in Hindu thought. Kali represents the darker aspect of the divine feminine, not just creation and nurturing, but destruction and death. She is the cremation ground where bodies are burned. She is the inevitable end that comes to all living things. She is the force that destroys the ego and breaks down all illusions. Hindu philosophy argues that this destruction is necessary, that creation cannot continue without destruction, that new life cannot emerge without old life ending. Her temples are places of both worship and fear. Devotees offer her blood sacrifices, though now usually symbolic or animal rather than human. Historical accounts suggest that in ancient times, particularly among certain tantric sects and the Thuggee cult, human sacrifices were performed, particularly of criminals or enemies, as offerings to satisfy her terrible hunger. The British colonial records from the 18th and 19th centuries describe with horrified fascination the Thuggee cult that worshipped Kali through ritual murder, though these accounts may be exaggerated or propagandistic. Even today, her festivals involve elaborate rituals where devotees prove their devotion through acts that would seem extreme to outsiders, walking through fire, piercing their bodies with hooks, entering trance states where they claim Kali possesses them, speaking in tongues, prophesying, moving in ways their bodies shouldn't move. These aren't performances, but genuine religious experiences where the boundary between devotee and deity becomes permeable. Her iconography remains deliberately terrifying. Garlands of skulls, said to represent the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, symbolizing her power over all language and knowledge, but also literally depicting decapitated heads of demons she's killed. Her tongue extended in bloodlust and absorption. Her weapons dripping with ichor. Her wild hair and naked body, rejecting all social conventions and civilized restraints. Her foot on Shiva's chest, showing that even the greatest gods must submit to her power. Every element designed to invoke both terror and reverence, to remind worshippers that the divine includes not just love and protection, but also violence and destruction. Hindu theology attempts to reconcile this apparent contradiction, worshipping a blood-drinking destroyer as a loving mother, by arguing that Kali's destruction targets evil, ignorance, and ego. She destroys what needs to be destroyed. She kills what needs to die. She drinks the blood of demons, yes, but demons represent internal evils, pride, greed, hatred, delusion. By destroying these, she liberates her devotees from suffering. The severed heads represent thoughts we need to abandon. The blood she drinks represents the life force we give to negative patterns that must be consumed and ended. But the mythology itself doesn't fully support this benign interpretation. The stories show Kali losing control, becoming drunk on destruction, threatening to destroy everything, including the innocent. They show a goddess who must be stopped by her own husband because she cannot stop herself. They reveal a dark truth about the nature of violence. Even righteous violence can become unrighteous if taken too far. Even necessary destruction can become unnecessary evil. Even a protector can become a threat. Kali stands as a reminder that the most terrifying evil isn't always separate from good. Sometimes it's what good becomes when it goes too far, when protection transforms into destruction, when the surgeon cutting away disease doesn't know when to stop cutting and begins to cut into healthy tissue. She represents the terrifying possibility that saving the world might require destroying it, that the cure might be as deadly as the disease, that the protector might be as dangerous as the threat. If you're enjoying this journey through mythology's darkest corners, leave a comment below with the word darkness, and tell me which of these evil gods disturbs you most and why. And make sure you're subscribed, because we're only getting started, and what comes next might be even more shocking. Set, the god who murdered his brother. The ancient Egyptians had a complex relationship with Set, the god of chaos, desert storms, and violence. Unlike Apophis, who represented pure destruction, Set occupied a more nuanced position in Egyptian theology. He was necessary chaos, the storm that tested civilization, the force of disorder that paradoxically helped maintain cosmic balance by opposing it. But his acts were so heinous that his very name became synonymous with evil, and later Egyptian dynasties tried to erase him from history completely. Set's most infamous crime forms the central tragedy of Egyptian mythology, the murder of his brother Osiris. The story begins in the early days of divine rule over Egypt, when gods walked the earth as pharaohs and the boundary between divine and mortal was permeable. Osiris, the green god of agriculture and fertility, ruled as pharaoh with wisdom and kindness that made him beloved throughout Egypt. His wife Isis stood beside him, a goddess of magic and motherhood whose power rivaled the greatest gods. Together, they brought order, prosperity, and civilization to Egypt. They taught humans agriculture, law, religion, and all the arts that separated civilization from barbarism. Their kingdom flourished. The Nile flooded regularly, crops grew abundantly, and the people prospered under their benevolent rule. But Set, Osiris's younger brother, burned with jealousy that festered like an infected wound. Ancient texts describe Set as red-haired and violent-tempered, associated with the deadly red desert that surrounded the fertile Nile Valley. While Osiris received love and praise, while children sang songs about the wise pharaoh and poets composed verses celebrating his reign, Set received fear and suspicion. The desert he controlled was where Egyptians exiled criminals, where enemies invaded from, where lost travelers died of thirst and heat. His domain was death and desolation, while his brother's was life and abundance. Set was necessary. Egypt needed the desert as a buffer against enemies, needed the storms he commanded to break the brutal heat, but necessary isn't the same as loved. Set's resentment transformed slowly from passive envy into active murderous intent. Egyptian mythology records his plotting with disturbing detail, showing a mind that could plan evil with patience and precision. He didn't act impulsively in rage. He calculated, prepared, crafted an elaborate trap. Set commissioned the finest craftsmen in Egypt to build a magnificent sarcophagus, a chest so beautiful that any god would want to own it. It was made from the rarest woods, inlaid with gold and precious stones, carved with protective hieroglyphs. But Set gave the craftsmen one unusual instruction. It must be built to exact specifications, matching the precise dimensions of Osiris's body. Then Set threw a feast, inviting Osiris and dozens of other gods to his palace. He played the role of gracious host perfectly, offering the finest food and drink, entertaining his guests with music and dance, acting like a loving brother celebrating his sibling's success. When the feast reached its height and the gods were relaxed and unsuspecting, Set presented the chest as a gift. He announced whoever fit inside it perfectly could keep it as a prize. It seemed like harmless entertainment, a game for intoxicated gods. God after god tried and failed to fit correctly. Some were too tall, their heads or feet extending beyond the chest's edges. Others were too short, rattling around inside with space to spare. The gods laughed, enjoying the competition. Finally, Osiris lay down inside, curious about this magnificent chest. The moment Osiris settled into the sarcophagus, realizing with surprise that it fit him perfectly, Set's co-conspirators, 72 conspirators who had been positioned throughout the room, slammed the lid shut. They moved with practiced coordination, clearly rehearsed. They hammered nails through the lid, sealing Osiris inside. They poured molten lead over the seams, making the seal airtight and unbreakable. And before Isis or any loyal god could react, before anyone fully understood what was happening, Set's allies hurled the sealed chest into the Nile River. Osiris, trapped inside the airtight sarcophagus, drowned in absolute darkness as the current carried him away toward the Mediterranean Sea. Imagine his terror, a god who had ruled Egypt, who had commanded respect and love, now helpless, suffocating, unable to break free, feeling his consciousness fade as water and lead and darkness pressed in from all sides. His last thoughts would have been of Isis, of his kingdom, of the brother who had betrayed him with such calculated cruelty. But Set's evil didn't end with fratricide. When Isis, through determination and powerful magic, spent years searching for Osiris's body, finally locating it in Byblos, where it had washed ashore and been incorporated into a palace pillar, When she brought it back to Egypt and began funeral rites to resurrect him, Set discovered what she'd done. Ancient texts describe him flying into a rage so violent that he transformed into a storm, not metaphorically but literally, his body becoming wind and sand in fury, tearing across Egypt to find his brother's corpse. When Set found Osiris's body, he committed an act so horrifying that Egyptians could barely speak of it directly. He tore Osiris's body into 14 pieces and scattered them across all of Egypt, from the delta in the north to Nubia in the south, from the Red Sea coast to the western desert. Each piece was hidden, buried, or thrown into crocodile-infested waters. Set took his brother's head and buried it in one city, his heart and buried it in another, his legs separated and hidden in different provinces, his arms sent to opposite ends of the kingdom. The dismemberment wasn't random violence, it was strategic necromancy, preventing resurrection through geographic impossibility. The story doesn't end with Set's triumph, though he likely believed it did. Isis, driven by love more powerful than Set's hatred and possessing magic that rivaled the greatest gods, spent years searching for every piece of her husband's dismembered body. She traveled the length and breadth of Egypt, using divination, questioning spirits, following leads, refusing to give up hope. She found 13 of the 14 pieces. Only Osiris's phallus remained lost, eaten by fish in the Nile. Through her most powerful magic, Isis reassembled Osiris, creating him a new phallus of gold to replace what had been lost. She performed the first mummification, wrapping his reconstituted body in linen, anointing it with oils, speaking words of power that would preserve it forever. Isis brought Osiris back to a kind of life, not as a living god ruling Egypt, but as the lord of the underworld, ruler of the dead. He became the judge who would weigh every soul, determining who deserved paradise and who deserved punishment. In this way, Osiris's murder paradoxically gave him even greater power. Every human who died would face him, and Set's crime ensured his brother would be remembered forever as the god who conquered death itself. Set ruled Egypt as pharaoh after Osiris's murder, but his reign was marked by chaos and disaster. The Nile floods became unpredictable. Crops failed. Foreign enemies sensed weakness and invaded. The gods and humans alike saw Set's rule as illegitimate, tainted by fratricide. Worse, Isis had conceived a son from the resurrected Osiris, Horus, who would grow to challenge Set for the throne. The subsequent war between Horus and Set lasted 80 years and involved battles so destructive that they reshaped the Egyptian landscape. Set, fighting to keep the throne he'd murdered for, committed further atrocities. In one battle, he tore out Horus's eye, which became the famous Eye of Horus symbol. In retaliation, Horus castrated Set, mirroring the violence Set had done to Osiris's body. The battles escalated from physical combat to magical warfare, with each god transforming into different animals to gain advantage. Hippopotami fighting crocodiles, hawks battling serpents, bulls goring lions. Eventually, the gods assembled as a tribunal to judge between Set and Horus. The trials involved tests, contests, and hearings that dragged on for years. Set argued that might made right, that he had taken the throne through strength and should keep it through strength. Horus argued for legitimacy through lineage, being Osiris's son and rightful heir. Some gods supported Set, appreciating his strength and power. Others supported Horus, believing in justice and legitimate succession. The final judgment went against Set. He was stripped of his kingship, exiled to the desert permanently, condemned to be remembered as the murderer, the betrayer, the archetypal villain. Later Egyptian dynasties, particularly those that saw themselves as descended from Horus, demonized Set further. His statues were destroyed. His name was chiseled off monuments. Priests refused to speak his name. He became the Egyptian equivalent of Satan, the embodiment of evil against which the righteous must struggle. But here's the disturbing complexity. Set wasn't always evil. Earlier dynasties had worshipped him as a protector, particularly those from Upper Egypt where the desert was closer and more relevant to daily life. The pharaoh Seti I and Seti II were named after Set. The Hyksos invaders identified Set with their storm god Baal. Set served Ra by defending his solar boat against Apophis every night. Who better to fight chaos than the god of chaos himself? Set's strength and violence were necessary for cosmic balance. This makes Set's evil more psychologically complex and more human than straightforward monsters. He wasn't born evil or created as an evil force. He chose evil through jealousy, through resentment at being less loved than his brother, through inability to accept his role in the cosmic order. He had the capacity for heroism. He did defend Ra nightly against Apophis, but also the capacity for the most heinous betrayal. He represents the terrifying possibility that anyone, even gods, even heroes, can choose evil if they allow resentment and jealousy to fester into hatred and violence. The murder of Osiris stands as mythology's perhaps most influential fratricide. It established a template for brother killing brother, for betrayal within families, for evil emerging from those closest to us. Cain and Abel, Romulus and Remus, countless other mythological and historical fratricides echo Set's original crime. The psychological truth Set's mythology reveals is this: the people who can hurt us most are those we trust, those we love, those who know us well enough to know exactly where to strike. And sometimes, the people we love transform into people who want to destroy us, not despite our relationship, but because of it. Because intimacy breeds the resentment that can ferment into hatred that can explode into violence. Set shows us that evil isn't always external, isn't always other. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's the person sitting across from us at the feast, smiling while calculating our murder. Loki, the trickster who brings Ragnarok. Norse mythology presents a unique case of wickedness. Loki, the god who was neither fully evil nor entirely good, but whose actions would ultimately cause the destruction of all gods and the end of the world itself. In the frozen halls of Asgard, among the proud warrior gods of the Vikings, Loki stood apart. Not fully Aesir god nor fully giant, he occupied a space between categories, between loyalty and betrayal. The Vikings understood that the most dangerous enemies aren't always those who openly oppose you. Sometimes they're the friends who smile while holding the knife. Loki began as Odin's blood brother. The ritual that made them brothers involved mixing their actual blood, creating a bond that Vikings considered more sacred than family ties established by mere birth. He was a companion to Thor, the thunder god whose adventures often required Loki's cleverness to succeed. He was a problem solver who used tricks and shape-shifting to help the gods escape difficult situations. Ancient Norse tales record how Loki's cunning saved Asgard multiple times. When a giant demanded the sun, moon, and goddess Freya as payment for building Asgard's walls impossibly quickly, Loki transformed into a mare to seduce and distract the giant's magical stallion, preventing the work's completion and saving the gods from an impossible debt. When Thor's hammer Mjolnir was stolen by the giant teacher Wyrm, Loki conceived and executed the plan to retrieve it, dressing Thor as a bride to infiltrate the giant's wedding feast. His intelligence and creativity made him invaluable to Asgard's survival. But Loki's nature contained a seed of destruction that would eventually consume everything. Norse mythology provides hints about the origin of this evil, his parentage from giants, beings of chaos and disorder who opposed the god's order. His mother was a giantess named Laufey or Nal. His father was the giant Farbody, whose name meant cruel striker. From birth, Loki carried the blood of Asgard's enemies, and though the gods accepted him, though Odin made him blood brother, that essential otherness remained. Loki's first truly evil act came from jealousy mixed with chaos for its own sake. Balder, the most beloved of all gods, was beautiful, kind, wise, and invulnerable. His mother Frigg had extracted oaths from every substance in existence that they wouldn't harm him. Animals wouldn't bite him. Blades couldn't cut him. Fire wouldn't burn him. Poison had no effect. He had become effectively immortal, and the gods made a game of it, throwing weapons at Balder and laughing as everything bounced harmlessly off him. These celebrations honored Balder, reaffirming his special status. Loki, watching this celebration, felt something dark stir within him. Norse sagas don't fully explain why. Was it envy of Balder's universal love? Resentment that even Loki's own children weren't celebrated this way? Or simply the chaotic impulse to break something beautiful, to prove that nothing is truly invulnerable, to shatter the gods' confidence in their security? Perhaps all three, or something more primal that defied explanation. Norse mythology describes what happened next with tragic precision. Loki learned through trickery and disguise that Frigg had overlooked one substance when extracting oaths, mistletoe, which seemed too young and harmless to bother with. Loki crafted a dart from mistletoe, or in some versions a spear, testing it carefully to ensure it retained the capacity to harm. Then he approached Hr, Baldur's blind brother, who sat apart from the games, unable to participate in honoring Baldur because he couldn't see to aim. "Here," Loki said, his voice honey-sweet with hidden malice, "let me help you honor your brother. Everyone else is throwing things at Baldur. You should too." He placed the mistletoe dart in HR's hand and guided his aim, adjusting the angle, ensuring the trajectory would be true. "Now throw," Loki whispered. HR threw. The mistletoe dart flew true and pierced Baldur's heart. The most beloved god fell dead, and the golden age of the gods died with him. The Norse cosmos would never recover from this moment. The death of Baldur triggered events that Norse mythology describes as the beginning of the end. The gods mourned with grief so profound it manifested physically. The sky darkened. The seas became violent. The earth trembled. Frigg sent a messenger to the underworld to bargain for Baldur's return. Hel, goddess of death and ironically Loki's own daughter, agreed that Baldur could return to life if every being in existence wept for him. Every god, every human, every animal, every plant, every stone. Messengers spread across the 9 realms, and everything wept for Baldur. Everything except one giantess named Thok, hiding in a cave, who refused to shed tears. That giantess was Loki in disguise, ensuring his crime remained permanent. With even one creature refusing to weep, Baldur remained dead. The gods finally understood what Loki was, not occasionally mischievous, but fundamentally malevolent. They hunted him across the 9 realms. Loki fled, shape-shifting to evade capture. He became a salmon and hid in a waterfall. But the gods were determined, and they'd learned from Loki's own cleverness. They invented the fishing net based on a design Loki himself had created and then burned to hide evidence. They used it to catch him, Thor grabbing the salmon Loki by the tail, which is why Norse mythology claims salmon have tails that taper. Loki's punishment for Baldur's death revealed both divine justice and divine cruelty. The gods took Loki and 2 of his sons with the giantess Angra, Narfi, and Vali, into a cave deep beneath the earth. They transformed Vali into a wolf, removing his human consciousness, and watched as the wolf Vali tore his brother Narfi to pieces, driven by animal instinct to murder his own brother, while whatever remained of Vali's mind screamed helplessly inside. They took Narfi's entrails and used them as unbreakable chains to bind Loki to 3 great rocks. Above his head, they positioned a venomous serpent that would drip poison onto his face for eternity. His wife Seijen, who despite everything still loved him, stayed beside him in that cave. She held a bowl to catch the poison, protecting Loki from its burns. But whenever the bowl filled and she had to turn away to empty it, venom would fall on Loki's face. The poison's touch caused him to convulse in agony. These convulsions, Vikings believed, caused earthquakes. Every earthquake was a reminder of Loki's crime and punishment, the bound god writhing in eternal torment beneath the world. But here's where Loki's story becomes truly terrifying. Norse prophecy declared he would have his revenge. At Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when the forces of chaos finally overwhelmed order, Loki's bonds would break. He would emerge from his underground prison no longer the clever companion, but fully transformed into the destroyer, leading the forces of chaos against Asgard. Ancient texts describe him captaining Naglfar, a ship made entirely from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, a vessel so horrifying that Vikings practiced cutting the fingernails and toenails of corpses specifically to slow Naglfar's construction. Loki would sail this ship of death, carrying an army of giants and monsters, including his own monstrous children. Fenrir the wolf, who would devour Odin, Jormungandr the world serpent who would kill Thor, and Hel, whose realm of death would empty, as she sent all the dishonored dead to join the battle. The Ragnarok prophecy describes the final battle with apocalyptic detail. Loki would kill Heimdall, guardian of Asgard's gates, though Heimdall would kill him in return. Fenrir would devour Odin, then be killed by Odin's son Vidar, who would tear the wolf's jaws apart. Thor would slay Jormungandr, but die from the serpent's venom 9 steps after victory. Tyr would kill and be killed by the hellhound Garmr. The fire giant Surt would engulf the world in flames. Asgard would burn. Midgard would burn. The 9 realms would burn. The world tree Yggdrasil would burn. Reality itself would end. And all this destruction, all these deaths, the end of the cosmos itself, traced back to one god's decision to kill Baldur. Loki's evil wasn't sudden or impulsive. It was progressive, cumulative, each act of malice making the next one easier, each betrayal making the next betrayal more inevitable. He started with pranks and tricks. He escalated to serious problems that still turned out okay. Then he murdered the most beloved god through deception and proxy. Then he ensured that murder remained permanent. Then he would destroy everything. What makes Loki especially disturbing is how human his evil feels. He wasn't born a monster. He wasn't created as a force of destruction. He chose evil incrementally, through choices that built on previous choices, through resentments that accumulated into hatred, through loyalty that curdled into betrayal. The Vikings understood something profound about evil when they created Loki, that wickedness often wears friendly faces, that destroyers often begin as helpers, that the apocalypse starts with a betrayal at a celebration where everyone trusted everyone else. Loki represents the terrifying banality of evil's progression, how today's small betrayal makes tomorrow's larger betrayal easier, how moral boundaries erode gradually until we wake up one day having become something monstrous without quite noticing the transformation. And he represents the ultimate revenge of the excluded, the marginalized, the never quite accepted. If you keep rejecting someone, eventually they'll give you a reason to fear them, and by then it will be too late to make amends. We've reached the midpoint of our journey through evil's pantheon, but the darkness gets deeper. In the next section, we descend into Mesopotamian nightmares, Polynesian underworlds, Greek discord, divine jealousy, and paternal cannibalism. The worst is yet to come. Lamashtu, the demon who devours babies. In ancient Mesopotamia, in the shadowed alleys of Babylon and the mud-brick homes of Sumerian cities, mothers whispered protection spells over their newborns every night. They weren't protecting their children from disease or accident. They were protecting them from Lamashtu, a demoness so feared that her name alone could curse a household. Parents hung amulets showing her image on every door, not to honor her, but to ward her away through ancient magic that declared, "We know your face, and you have no power here." Lamashtu wasn't born from chaos or darkness or some primordial evil. According to Mesopotamian mythology, she was the daughter of Anu, the supreme sky god, king of all deities, creator of heaven and earth. She was divine royalty, born to privilege and power. But where her father created order and civilization, where other gods protected humanity and established laws, Lamashtu chose to spread suffering among mortals, particularly targeting the most vulnerable, pregnant women, nursing mothers, and their children. She was proof that evil doesn't always come from the outside, from chaos or disorder. Sometimes it comes from the inside, from corruption within the divine itself. Ancient texts describe her appearance with visceral horror that disturbs us even today, millennia later. She had the head of a lion, not majestic but feral, with eyes that saw humans only as prey. Her mouth was filled with donkey's teeth, blunt and strong, designed for crushing rather than cutting, suggesting she didn't just kill quickly but chewed, consumed, made her victim suffer. Her body was naked, humanoid, but wrong, with breasts that nursed pigs and dogs instead of human babies, a perversion of motherhood, a mockery of maternal care. Her feet weren't human but bird talons, designed for clutching and carrying away prey. She had wings like a storm cloud, allowing her to move silently through the night sky, invisible against darkness. Mesopotamian artwork depicts her standing in a boat navigating the river of the underworld, accompanied by a black dog and a pig, her hunting companions, or perhaps her offspring. She holds snakes in both hands, living serpents she could command to strike at her enemies or inject into homes to poison families. Her iconography was carefully crafted to represent everything that terrified Mesopotamian mothers: predation of the innocent, perversion of motherhood, disease carried by vermin, death arriving on silent wings in the night. Her mythology reveals a systematic predator with specific hunting patterns. Lamashtu would enter homes at night, silent as shadow, immune to locked doors or protective herbs unless specifically magical amulets were present. She specialized in infant mortality, causing stillbirths where the baby dies in the womb, sudden deaths of newborns for no apparent reason, and disease in young children that doctors couldn't cure. Mesopotamian medical texts attribute complications during pregnancy and childbirth directly to her interference: prolonged labor, hemorrhaging, breech births, infections. All the ways pregnancy can go catastrophically wrong were blamed on Lamashtu's malevolent presence. But her evil extended beyond murder. She would steal breast milk from nursing mothers, causing their milk to dry up inexplicably, leaving their babies to starve even though the mother was right there, desperate to feed them, but unable to produce milk. She spread disease through her very presence: fever, seizures, mysterious illnesses that struck without warning and killed without explanation. Ancient doctors learned to recognize Lamashtu's touch, specific symptoms that indicated demonic rather than natural cause, requiring exorcism rather than medicine. These symptoms included sudden onset, resistance to normal treatments, and an unusual pattern of deterioration that seemed almost intentional in its cruelty. What made Lamashtu uniquely terrifying was her pleasure in suffering. Unlike demons who killed for cosmic reasons or served some divine purpose, Lamashtu seemed motivated purely by cruelty and sadistic enjoyment. Texts describe her laughing as she strangled infants, delighting in mothers' screams as they discovered their children dead in their cribs. She would sometimes let babies live just long enough for parents to bond with them, to name them, to imagine their futures, before returning to kill them, maximizing emotional devastation. This wasn't mindless evil or chaos. It was calculated torture designed to cause maximum psychological suffering. The fear she inspired shaped Mesopotamian culture in profound ways. Pregnancy was considered an extraordinarily dangerous time, not just physically but spiritually. Pregnant women underwent elaborate rituals for protection, wearing specific amulets around their necks depicting Lamashtu herself with accompanying incantations. The logic was sympathetic magic. By wearing her image, you acknowledged her power and essentially said, "I see you, I know you, you cannot surprise me." Other amulets depicted protective deities or contained written spells that invoked divine protection. Women avoided certain places where Lamashtu was known to hunt: crossroads at night, abandoned buildings, areas near stagnant water where disease-carrying insects bred. They recited prayers before sleeping, creating protective circles around their beds with specific substances. They made offerings to protective deities, particularly Pazuzu, another demon whose appearance was nearly as horrifying as Lamashtu's, but who, paradoxically, protected women and children from her predations. Pazuzu was depicted with a dog's face, scorpion tail, and wings, terrifying, but Mesopotamians believed he hated Lamashtu and would fight her if properly invoked. Midwives were trained not just in delivering babies, but in performing protective magic against demonic interference. They learned specific chants to recite during labor, rituals to perform immediately after birth, ways to detect if Lamashtu was present, and emergency exorcism techniques if protection failed. Birth was as much a spiritual battle as a physical process, with the midwife serving as both medical practitioner and spiritual warrior, protecting mother and child from supernatural predation. New mothers remained in seclusion for 40 days after birth, a period considered especially vulnerable. During this time, the mother and baby stayed in a protected room where amulets hung on every wall, where protective deities were invoked multiple times daily, where male relatives stood guard at night. Visitors were limited and screened. Food was carefully prepared and blessed. Every precaution was taken because Mesopotamians genuinely believed that Lamashtu was hunting constantly, looking for opportunities to strike. The psychological impact of this belief system was profound. Infant mortality rates in the ancient world were staggeringly high. Perhaps 40% of children died before age 5 from disease, malnutrition, accidents, and complications we now prevent or treat easily. Mesopotamian mothers needed an explanation for this constant loss. Lamashtu provided that explanation. She gave terror a name and a face. She transformed random tragedy into deliberate malevolence, which paradoxically might have been easier to process. At least malevolence could theoretically be fought against, protected against, whereas random chance offered no such comfort. But this belief also had dark consequences. When babies died despite all precautions and rituals, despite amulets and prayers and protective deities, the question became, why did Lamashtu succeed? Had the mother done something wrong, failed some ritual, attracted the demoness' attention through sin or error? This created a system where bereaved mothers blamed themselves, where infant death became not just tragic, but shameful, evidence of spiritual failure. Historical records indicate that suspected Lamashtu attacks sometimes led to accusations, scapegoating, and violence. If multiple babies in a neighborhood died, the community might decide someone was attracting Lamashtu or working with her, usually an outsider, a widow, or a woman who didn't conform to social norms. These accusations could lead to exile or execution, creating a secondary level of evil where Lamashtu's mythology caused harm even when the demoness herself wasn't actually involved. Lamashtu represents something psychologically crucial in human mythology: the need to explain and combat infant mortality and maternal death during childbirth, perhaps the most viscerally terrifying experiences humans face. By creating Lamashtu, by giving this terror a form and name, Mesopotamians gained some sense of control. They could fight her through magic and ritual even if they couldn't fight the actual causes of infant mortality, infection, genetic disorders, complications we now prevent through modern medicine. But Lamashtu also reveals a darker truth. Sometimes the evil we imagine is as destructive as real evil. The fear she inspired, the guilt and shame her mythology imposed on bereaved mothers, the social consequences of belief in her malevolence. These caused real suffering even if Lamashtu herself was mythological. In this way, she represents how belief in evil can create evil, how the stories we tell about wickedness can themselves become wicked, how fighting monsters can turn us into monsters if we're not careful. Lamashtu stands as a reminder that the most intimate evils, the ones that strike in our homes and target our children, often feel more terrifying than cosmic destruction. Apophis might end the world, but Lamashtu would kill your baby specifically, individually, making your loss personal. And that personal targeted evil creates a specific kind of horror that cosmic destruction cannot match. The horror of the predator that knows you, hunts you specifically, wants to hurt you in particular. The horror of evil that isn't random or impersonal but deliberate, calculated, and sadistic. Whiro, the Maori's Lord of Darkness. In the islands of New Zealand, where volcanic mountains pierce storm clouds and ancient forests hold secrets older than human memory, the Maori people understood that evil existed before creation itself. They called him Whiro, and his story explains not just where evil comes from, but why it can never truly be eliminated, why darkness will always exist as the necessary opposite of light. Maori cosmology begins in the crushing darkness before creation. Papa and Rungi, Earth Mother and Sky Father, were locked in eternal embrace, their bodies pressed together so tightly that no space existed between them. In this prenatal prison lived their children, powerful Atua or gods including Tain, who would become god of forests, Tangaroa, who would become god of oceans, and Whiro, who would become god of death and darkness. These divine beings existed in absolute darkness, crushed between their parents' bodies with no room to move, no space to breathe, no light to see. It was pre-existence, the state before the world as we know it began. The suffering in this darkness was profound. The gods couldn't grow, couldn't act, couldn't become what they were meant to be. They remained trapped in potential, unable to actualize, eternally compressed and constrained. Eventually, they began discussing what to do about their intolerable situation. Most wanted change, wanted separation, wanted light and space and the ability to exist independently. But opinions differed on methods and goals. Tain, who would become god of forests and birds, proposed the most radical solution: forcibly separate their parents, pushing Sky Father upward and holding Earth Mother down, creating space between them where light could enter and life could flourish. Most of his siblings agreed, eager to exist in a world of their own. But Whiro, god of death, darkness, and evil, refused absolutely. He wanted to remain in darkness. He preferred the crushing void, the absence of creation, the nothingness that existed before distinction and definition. This is crucial to understanding Whiro's evil. He didn't become evil later, didn't fall from grace or get corrupted. He was evil from before the beginning, evil as a fundamental orientation toward uncreation rather than creation, toward darkness rather than light, toward ending rather than becoming. When his brothers moved to separate Papa and Rungi, Whiro fought against them with all his divine strength. Maori mythology describes the cosmic battle with vivid imagery that reveals the stakes involved. Tain positioned himself carefully, placing his back against Papa, Earth Mother, and his feet against Rungi, Sky Father. Then he pushed with all divine strength, pressing his parents apart through sheer force of will and power. The separation was agonizing. Papa and Rungi had been together for eternity, and tearing them apart was tearing the universe itself in half. They wept as they separated, their tears becoming rain, their blood becoming various natural phenomena, their screams becoming wind. Whiro attacked Tain during this moment of maximum vulnerability and strain, trying to stop the separation, trying to maintain the darkness. He struck Tain, weakening his strength. He called upon forces of chaos and disorder to resist creation. But Tain succeeded despite Whiro's interference. Sky separated from Earth. Light entered existence for the first time, flooding into the space between, illuminating what had always been dark. The gods could finally see each other, could move independently, could begin creating the world. And in that moment, according to Maori belief, evil was born into the world, not as a corruption of good, but as the natural consequence of creation itself. The act of making light created shadow. The act of imposing order created disorder as its necessary opposite. The act of separating created the possibility of conflict. Whiro's rage at this act of creation transformed him fully into the embodiment of everything dark and destructive. As his brothers began creating, Tain making forests and birds, Tangaroa making oceans and fish, other gods creating mountains, valleys, weather patterns, and eventually humanity, Whiro descended into the underworld, building his kingdom in Te Pa, the realm of eternal night. From this subterranean fortress carved from living darkness, he would wage eternal war against creation itself. But unlike the dramatic cosmic battles of Greek or Norse mythology, Whiro's warfare was subtle, insidious, working through influence rather than direct confrontation. Whiro's evil manifested not in dramatic destruction, but in subtle corruption. He created evil spirits, malevolent entities that would inhabit the living world as invisible forces influencing human thoughts and actions. Maori tradition holds that every wicked impulse, every cruel thought, every harmful action originates with Whiro's whispered suggestions. He doesn't force humans to be evil. Forcing removes choice, which reduces the corruption's impact. Instead, he whispers suggestions in moments of weakness, plants seeds of doubt that grow into destructive decisions, amplifies existing weaknesses until people destroy themselves and each other. This makes Whiro more psychologically sophisticated than gods who simply attack and destroy. He understands human nature intimately, our fears, our desires, our vulnerabilities. He knows that humans don't need much encouragement to harm each other, that we carry within us the capacity for evil and just need permission or justification to act on it. So Whiro provides that permission through psychological manipulation disguised as our own thoughts. Maori tradition describes how Whiro's influence manifests in daily life. When a person feels sudden rage disproportionate to circumstances, that's Whiro amplifying anger. When someone experiences crushing despair that makes suicide seem rational, that's Whiro darkening their thoughts. When communities fracture over petty disputes that escalate into blood feuds, that's Whiro sowing discord. When diseases spread for no apparent reason, that's Whiro's breath carrying illness. He works through natural means, human psychology, social dynamics, disease vectors, making his evil deniable while ensuring it's pervasive. The Maori believed Whiro's evil extended beyond death into the afterlife. When a person died, their Whiro or spirit would have to journey through the underworld to reach the afterlife realm. This journey passed through Whiro's territory, and he and his demon servants would attack these souls, trying to devour them or trap them in eternal torment. The journey was treacherous, requiring the dead to navigate darkness, while being hunted by entities that wanted to ensure their suffering continued forever. Protection from Whiro during this journey required specific knowledge passed down through generations. The dead needed to know proper prayers and karakia, ritual chants that created protective barriers. They needed assistance from protective ancestor spirits, kaidiaki, who would guide them through darkness and fight off Whiro's servants. They needed the living to perform correct funeral rituals, ensuring the dead were properly prepared for the dangerous journey ahead. Without these protections, souls could be lost forever, trapped in Whiro's realm, suffering for eternity. Tribal priests, Tohunga, learned to recognize signs of Whiro's influence in illness, misfortune, and social discord. They developed diagnostic techniques to distinguish between natural sickness and spiritual illness caused by Whiro's evil spirits. Natural illness responded to herbal medicine, rest, and normal care. Spiritual illness required complex exorcism rituals involving sacred chants, purification ceremonies, and community participation to drive out Whiro's influence. These rituals weren't simple prayers, but elaborate performances that could last days, involving the entire community. The Tohunga would identify which specific evil spirit was causing the affliction, then invoke appropriate protective deities and ancestral spirits to combat it. The community would participate through chanting, creating a collective spiritual force strong enough to overpower individual demonic influence. Success wasn't guaranteed. Sometimes Whiro's hold was too strong, and the victim would die despite all efforts. What makes Whiro particularly disturbing is the Maori understanding that he can never be defeated, only resisted. Because he emerged from the first moment of creation, from the first separation of light and darkness, he is as fundamental to existence as gravity or time. Eliminating Whiro would require eliminating creation itself, returning to the pre-creation darkness of Papa and Rungi's eternal embrace. As long as there is light, there must be shadow. As long as there is creation, there must be the force that wants to end creation. As long as there is life, there must be death. This philosophy created a worldview focused not on ultimate victory over evil, but on constant vigilance and eternal resistance. The Maori didn't expect to end evil. They expected to fight it every day, in every generation, forever. This is simultaneously depressing and liberating. Depressing because there's no final victory, no ultimate peace. Liberating because failure isn't final either. Losing today's battle doesn't mean losing the eternal war. Whiro also represents the Maori understanding that evil emerges from the natural structure of existence, rather than being imported from outside. He wasn't a fallen angel who rebelled. He wasn't corrupted by external forces. He was one of the original gods who simply preferred darkness to light, non-existence to existence, ending to beginning. His evil was a choice, yes, but a choice that revealed darkness as one of the universe's fundamental options. Always available, always tempting, always present. This makes resistance to Whiro a daily practice rather than a dramatic confrontation. Every kind act resists his influence. Every community building resists his discord. Every healing resists his disease. Every choice for life and growth resists his preference for death and decay. The Maori understood that fighting cosmic evil doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like getting up in the morning, helping your neighbor, maintaining traditions, choosing compassion when revenge would be easier. Whiro stands as a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself dramatically. It doesn't always wear obvious monster forms or command demon armies. Sometimes it's the voice in our head telling us we're worthless. Sometimes it's the social dynamic that turns neighbors into enemies. Sometimes it's the depression that makes continued existence seem pointless. And fighting this subtle, pervasive evil requires not spectacular heroism, but consistent daily resistance. Choosing light when darkness would be easier. Choosing creation when destruction would be simpler. Choosing to continue when stopping would be tempting. The Mari concept of Whiro reveals a sophisticated understanding of evil as structural rather than exceptional, as constant rather than temporary, as emerging from existence itself rather than threatening it from outside. And this understanding demands a specific kind of courage, not the courage to fight one dramatic battle and win forever, but the courage to fight every day, knowing you'll have to fight again tomorrow, forever, and choosing to fight anyway. Eris, the goddess who started the Trojan War. Greek mythology is filled with powerful, dangerous deities, but none caused more devastation through a single act than Eris, goddess of discord and strife. Her story demonstrates how evil doesn't always announce itself with thunder and fire. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wrapped in gold, offered as a gift. Sometimes the most destructive forces in the universe don't look threatening at all until it's too late to defend against them. The city-state of Thessaly was preparing for the most magnificent wedding Mount Olympus had witnessed in centuries. Peleus, a mortal hero renowned for his courage and skill, was marrying Thetis, a sea nymph of extraordinary beauty and divine parentage. The marriage itself was politically significant, uniting mortal and divine worlds, creating a precedent for cooperation between different realms of existence. Zeus himself had arranged the marriage, which meant every god and goddess received an invitation to this celebration where divine and mortal worlds would unite in harmony. Every god except one, Eris, daughter of Nyx, primordial night itself, sister of death, doom, famine, and every other abstract force of destruction, found herself deliberately excluded from the guest list. The other gods considered her presence too dangerous, her nature too disruptive for such a joyous occasion. Discord personified wasn't welcome at a wedding celebrating unity. She was the one deity whose very presence could ruin the celebration, whose fundamental nature opposed the harmony this wedding represented. So they sent no invitation, hoping she wouldn't notice, wouldn't care, or wouldn't dare appear uninvited. They were catastrophically, world-endingly wrong. Greek texts describe what happened next with the precision of a disaster unfolding in slow motion, inevitable once set in motion, but impossible to stop. Eris arrived at the wedding feast invisible, wrapping herself in divine camouflage that made her undetectable even to gods with supernatural perception. She walked among the celebrating gods unseen, watching them laugh and feast and celebrate. And she carried with her a single golden apple, inscribed with 3 words in ancient Greek, Tau Kapal Flamblamba Sigma Tau, to the fairest. This apple of discord, as it came to be known, was her revenge for the exclusion. But it was more than simple revenge. It was a weapon of mass destruction disguised as a compliment, a trap so perfectly designed that even gods fell into it helplessly. Eris understood divine psychology perfectly. She knew that gods, despite their power and supposed wisdom, were vain, competitive, and easily manipulated through flattery. She knew that fairest was subjective enough to create ambiguity, and ambiguity creates conflict when multiple parties believe they deserve recognition. She rolled the golden apple into the center of the celebration and vanished, leaving chaos in her wake. The apple clattered across the marble floor, gleaming, beautiful, inscribed with words that seemed to promise recognition to whoever claimed it. 3 goddesses immediately reached for it, each absolutely convinced it was meant for her. Hera, queen of the gods and goddess of marriage. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. And Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Each had reasonable claim to the title fairest. Hera was the queen, literally the most powerful goddess, wife of Zeus, ruler of Olympus. How could fairest mean anyone but the queen? Athena was wisest, most respected for her intelligence and strategic thinking. embodying ideals of excellence that surpassed mere physical beauty. Surely fairest meant best in all ways, not just appearance? Aphrodite was literally the goddess of beauty, born from sea foam, more beautiful than any other being in existence. Obviously, fairest meant most beautiful, which meant the apple was hers by definition. The argument that erupted among them threatened to tear Olympus apart. These weren't minor goddesses having a petty dispute. These were three of the most powerful deities in existence, each with armies of followers, each capable of devastating power, each absolutely convinced she was right and the others were wrong. Hera could have called down divine punishment on anyone who opposed her claim. Athena could have strategically dismantled her opponents through brilliant tactical thinking. Aphrodite could have turned gods and mortals alike into pawns through manipulation of desire and love. Zeus, king of the gods, watching this dispute escalate, realized he was facing an impossible situation. If he chose one goddess, the other two would become his eternal enemies. If he chose none of them, all three would hate him. If he declared the question meaningless, he'd insult all three by suggesting their vanity was silly. He needed a solution that removed himself from the decision while appearing fair and neutral. So Zeus made a decision that would echo through generations with cascading consequences. He appointed Paris, a young Trojan prince, to judge which goddess deserved the apple. This choice, forcing a mortal to judge divine beauty and essentially rank three of the most powerful goddesses in existence, was itself a disaster waiting to unfold. It placed impossible responsibility on a mortal who couldn't possibly make this decision without creating divine enemies. The three goddesses appeared before Paris on Mount Ida, where he was living as a shepherd, exiled from Troy after a prophecy declared he would destroy the city. Each goddess offered bribes that revealed their core natures and their willingness to manipulate a mortal for vanity's sake. Hera offered power, dominion over all of Europe and Asia, making him the most powerful ruler in the mortal world. She would make him emperor of empires, conqueror of nations, a mortal approaching divine levels of authority. Athena offered glory, victory in every battle, strategic genius beyond any mortal, fame that would last forever. She would make him the greatest warrior and general in history, a name spoken with reverence for millennia, achieving immortality through reputation even after death. But Aphrodite offered something simpler and more immediately appealing, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Not power requiring years to build, not glory requiring decades of warfare, just love immediate and perfect, with a woman whose beauty was legendary even among mortals who regularly saw goddesses. Paris chose Aphrodite. He handed her the golden apple, perhaps not fully understanding what he was choosing, what he was rejecting, what consequences this decision would trigger. The moment the apple passed from his hands to hers, he set in motion events that would kill tens of thousands and destroy two civilizations. Because Helen of Sparta was already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, one of the most powerful rulers in Greece. When Paris traveled to Sparta, and with Aphrodite's magical assistance that made him irresistible and clouded Helen's judgment, seduced Helen to abandon her husband and daughter and sail with him to Troy, he didn't just break Xenia, the sacred bond of hospitality that protected guests. He violated an oath that bound all of Greece's kings and heroes through blood and honor. Years earlier, when Helen's extraordinary beauty attracted dozens of powerful suitors, creating political tension and the threat of war among Greek kingdoms, her father Tyndareus had required all potential husbands to swear an oath. They would defend whoever Helen married if anyone tried to steal or harm her. Every major Greek hero and king took this oath: Odysseus, Ajax, Diomedes, and dozens more. The oath was designed to prevent conflict over Helen by ensuring that attacking her husband meant fighting all of Greece. It worked as deterrent until Paris violated it with divine backing. So when Paris stole Helen, when the most beautiful woman in the world vanished from Sparta and appeared in Troy, all of Greece had no choice but to honor their oath and go to war. Menelaus called upon every king and hero who had sworn to defend Helen's marriage. They assembled the largest military force the ancient world had ever seen, Over 1,000 ships, tens of thousands of warriors, the greatest heroes of the age, all sailing to Troy to retrieve Helen and punish Paris for the theft. The Trojan War lasted 10 years. Homer's Iliad records only the final year's devastation, but that's enough to understand the scale of destruction. Achilles killing Hector, Troy's greatest defender, and dragging his corpse around the city walls. Ajax going mad and slaughtering livestock he believed were enemies. Odysseus conceiving the Trojan horse, the deception that finally breached Troy's impregnable walls. The burning of Troy, one of the ancient world's greatest cities, reduced to ashes. The death of Paris, killed by a poisoned arrow. The death of Achilles, struck in his only vulnerable spot. The enslavement or murder of Troy's entire population. Men killed, women taken as slaves, children thrown from city walls to ensure no survivors would seek revenge. But the devastation didn't end with Troy's fall. The returning Greeks faced their own disasters, curses triggered by atrocities committed during the war. Agamemnon, leader of the Greek forces, returned home victorious only to be murdered by his wife Clytemnestra, who had spent 10 years hating him for sacrificing their daughter Iphigenia to get favorable winds for the fleet. Odysseus wandered for another 10 years before reaching home, facing monsters, witches, and divine opposition, losing all his men, returning to find his household on the verge of collapse. Ajax, driven mad by losing Achilles' armor to Odysseus, killed himself in shame after slaughtering animals he believed were Greek leaders. Countless other heroes found their kingdoms destroyed, their families dead, their reputations ruined. Historians estimate the Trojan War killed tens of thousands, soldiers, civilians, children. It destroyed 2 civilizations, Troy completely eliminated, Greek kingdoms devastated by the long absence of their warriors and kings. It set in motion conflicts and vendettas that would continue for generations. Entire bloodlines were extinguished. Cities that had stood for centuries ceased to exist. Cultural knowledge was lost as libraries burned and scholars died. And all this suffering, death, and destruction originated from Eris rolling a golden apple into a wedding celebration. One goddess, one fruit, 3 words inscribed on it, to the fairest. One moment of petty revenge for being excluded from a party. That's the scale of evil Eris represents, not cosmic destruction, but social destruction, not ending the world, but ending worlds, not killing everyone, but destroying specific people, families, nations. Greek historians and philosophers later understood that Eris's evil was more subtle and more terrible than monsters or titans. She didn't attack directly. She didn't use physical force. She simply introduced competition where unity had existed, planted seeds of discord in fertile ground, and let mortal vanity and divine pride do the rest. She understood that you don't need to destroy people yourself if you can make them destroy each other. She understood that the most devastating weapons aren't swords or lightning but words, symbols, ideas that divide people who should be united. Eris represents the banality of evil's origin, how world-destroying consequences can emerge from trivial causes, how small acts of malice can cascade into massive tragedies, how petty revenge can escalate beyond all proportion or control. She shows us that apocalypse doesn't always announce itself with dramatic music and obvious villains. Sometimes it walks in quietly, rolls something beautiful into the center of the room, and leaves before anyone realizes what's been done. The apple of discord became a symbol in Western culture for any small thing that creates disproportionate conflict. Political slogans that divide nations, social controversies that fracture communities, personal disputes that destroy families. Whenever we see something small trigger something enormous, whenever we watch minor disagreements escalate into major conflicts, whenever we observe how easily humans turn against each other over symbols and abstractions, we're seeing Eris's fundamental insight. People don't need much encouragement to fight. They just need an excuse, a justification, something to fight over. Give them that, and they'll destroy each other while you watch from a distance, invisible, laughing. Hera, the queen who tortured the innocent. When we think of Greek mythology's villains, we often imagine monsters and titans, creatures clearly designated as evil opposed to gods and humans, threatening civilization from outside. But Zeus's queen, Hera, goddess of marriage and family, committed acts of cruelty that rivaled any demon's wickedness. Her evil was personal, calculated, methodical, and directed primarily at victims who had done nothing wrong except attract Zeus's attention or carry his child. She was the goddess who should have protected women and children, but instead became their torturer. Hera's position was unique among mythological deities. She was simultaneously the goddess protecting marriage and the wife trapped in the most infamous marriage in divine history. Zeus, king of the gods, supreme ruler of Olympus, was pathologically, compulsively unfaithful. Ancient texts record hundreds of affairs with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women. He pursued them through trickery, shape-shifting, and outright deception, transforming into a swan to seduce Leda, appearing as a golden shower of light to impregnate Danae, becoming a bull to abduct Europa. His infidelity wasn't occasional weakness, but constant behavior, a defining characteristic of his divine nature. Hera couldn't punish Zeus directly. He was too powerful, not just king of gods, but literally the most powerful being in existence, wielder of lightning that could destroy mountains, capable of overpowering all other gods combined. Challenging him directly would threaten cosmic order itself, potentially triggering divine civil war. So Hera directed her rage at those she could reach, Zeus's lovers, and especially their children. Her vengeance was systematic, creative, and horrifying in its cruelty. Consider Leto, a Titaness who became pregnant with Zeus's twins, Apollo and Artemis. When Hera discovered the pregnancy, she didn't kill Leto. That would have been too merciful, too quick. Instead, she cursed Leto to wander the earth unable to give birth anywhere the sun touched. Then Hera went further, using her divine authority to convince all lands to refuse Leto's shelter, threatening divine punishment to any place that helped the pregnant Titaness. Leto wandered in agony, in labor for 9 days and 9 nights, experiencing contractions but unable to deliver, her body trying to expel the babies, but magically prevented from completing the birth process anywhere in creation. Imagine that suffering, 9 days of labor without progress, pain without relief, knowing your babies are ready to be born, but being physically prevented from birthing them. And all because Zeus had made you pregnant, a situation you had no power to refuse given the vast difference in power between a Titaness and the king of gods. Only when the floating island of Delos, which technically belonged to no land and where the sun couldn't claim dominion, offered sanctuary, could Leto finally give birth. Even then, Hera prevented Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, from attending, making the birth agonizingly difficult. But Hera's cruelty toward Zeus's mortal lovers was even worse. Semele, princess of Thebes, became pregnant with Dionysus. Hera disguised herself as Semele's elderly nurse, gaining the young woman's trust, having intimate conversations the way women do, seeming supportive and maternal. Then she planted doubt in Semele's mind. How do you know this lover who visits you at night is really Zeus? Gods can shapeshift. Anyone could be deceiving you. Demand he prove his divinity by appearing in his true form. When Semele made this request, Zeus, who had promised her anything and was bound by that oath, had no choice. He warned her that seeing his true form would be dangerous. She insisted, having been manipulated by Hera's disguise into doubting his identity. Zeus appeared in his true form, as pure divine energy, lightning and power and radiance beyond mortal comprehension, and instantly incinerated Semele. She died screaming, her body disintegrating in divine fire, and Zeus had to rescue the unborn Dionysus by cutting the fetus from her burning corpse and sewing it into his own thigh to complete the pregnancy. Hera had manipulated an innocent girl into demanding her own death. She'd used trust, pretending to be a concerned nurse, to plant the seeds of Semele's destruction. She'd turned Zeus's promise against him, making him kill his lover through his own power. The cruelty was layered, sophisticated, demonstrating Hera's intelligence and her willingness to use that intelligence for evil. But perhaps Hera's most sustained campaign of terror targeted Heracles, Zeus's son by the mortal woman Alcmene. Though Heracles had done nothing wrong, he was simply born, an infant with no agency or choice in his parentage. Hera made destroying him her personal mission, a campaign of hatred lasting decades. When Heracles was an infant, merely 8 months old, Hera sent 2 enormous serpents to murder him in his crib. She wanted him dead before he could grow, before he could become strong enough to defend himself. The serpents entered the nursery at night, slithering toward the cradle where Heracles and his twin brother Iphicles slept. Iphicles screamed in terror. But Heracles, even as a baby, possessed his father's strength. He grabbed both serpents by their throats and strangled them, squeezing until their bodies went limp. The attempt revealed Hera's willingness to commit infanticide, to murder a helpless baby because she hated his father. When direct murder failed, Hera watched and waited. She let Heracles grow to adulthood, become a warrior, marry a woman named Megara, father children. She let him establish a peaceful life, let him believe he'd escaped her hatred, let him be happy. And then she struck with her most terrible weapon, madness. Greek mythology describes how Hera sent divine insanity to cloud Heracles' mind, using her power to override his consciousness and fill him with homicidal delusions. In his madness, Heracles believed his wife and children were enemies, monsters, threats, beings that needed to be destroyed. He murdered them with his own hands. He killed his wife, the woman he loved. He killed his children, the sons he'd played with, taught, protected. He did it himself, with his supernatural strength, while his true consciousness was imprisoned behind the madness, watching helplessly as Hera puppeted his body to commit the ultimate horror. When the madness finally lifted, when clarity returned, Heracles understood what he'd done. His grief was so profound, his guilt so overwhelming. He considered suicide as the only possible response to his actions. The famous 12 labors, nearly impossible tasks that took years to complete and almost killed Heracles multiple times, were penance for these murders Hera had forced him to commit. Fight the Nemean lion whose skin no weapon could pierce. Kill the hydra that grew 2 heads for every one cut off. Capture the golden hind of Artemis without harming it. Clean the Augean stables that hadn't been cleaned in 30 years in a single day. Drive away the Stymphalian birds with bronze beaks that ate human flesh. Capture the Cretan bull. Steal the mares of Diomedes that fed on human flesh. Obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. Steal the cattle of the monster Geryon. Fetch the apples of the Hesperides from the garden at the end of the world. Capture Cerberus, the 3-headed dog guarding the underworld, and bring him back alive. Each labor was designed to kill him. Each one placed him in situations where survival seemed impossible. And even when he succeeded, even when he completed all 12 tasks, Hera's hatred didn't end. She continued tormenting him throughout his life, sending madness, creating obstacles, turning his victories into tragedies. When he tried to marry Diana, Hera's influence led to Heracles' death, poisoned by a centaur's blood that burned him alive from the inside. Pain so excruciating that he built his own funeral pyre and threw himself on it, choosing death by fire over continued suffering. The psychology of Hera's evil reveals something disturbing about human nature projected onto divine scale. She couldn't punish Zeus, the actual source of her pain, so she punished everyone else. The women Zeus seduced, regardless of whether they consented, the children born from those unions, who had no choice in being born, even people tangentially connected to Zeus's affairs. Her pain was real, being trapped in a marriage to a compulsively unfaithful partner, while simultaneously being the goddess of marriage, created genuine suffering. But instead of addressing the actual problem or leaving the relationship, she externalized all rage onto innocent victims. Hera represents the evil of misdirected anger, of punishing the powerless because you can't reach the powerful, of victimizing those who suffer from the same person who hurt you. She shows how pain doesn't excuse cruelty, how being a victim doesn't justify creating more victims, how suffering can corrupt rather than ennoble if we allow it to consume us. She embodied the cycle of abuse, where the abused becomes the abuser, where pain is passed down rather than healed, where each generation suffers from the previous generation's unprocessed trauma. What makes Hera's evil especially disturbing is that she was worshipped, respected, called upon to protect marriages and women. Temples to Hera existed throughout Greece. Women prayed to her for happy marriages, for healthy children, for protection of their families. The goddess they prayed to for these blessings was the same goddess who sent infant-killing serpents, who drove fathers to murder their children, who tormented innocent women for being sexually assaulted by her husband. The contradiction between Hera's role and her actions reveals the cognitive dissonance humans can maintain when belief systems don't align with observed behavior. Hera stands as a reminder that institutional power, being queen, being the goddess of marriage, being celebrated and worshipped, doesn't equate to moral goodness. That those who present themselves as protectors can simultaneously be predators. That the people in charge of preventing harm can themselves be sources of harm. That evil doesn't always wear obvious villain costumes, but sometimes wears crowns, sits on thrones, and receives worship from those who don't see or don't want to acknowledge its true nature. Cronus, the father who devoured his children. Greek mythology's timeline of divine succession tells a story of fathers and sons, power and prophecy, and the terrifying lengths to which the powerful will go to maintain control. At the center of this dark saga stands Cronus, the Titan king whose evil was so profound that it defined him in a single horrifying act repeated 6 times. He ate his own children alive, swallowing them whole to prevent a prophecy of his overthrow. Cronus came to power through his own act of patricide. His father, Uranus, the sky god and first ruler of the universe, had become a tyrant. When his wife Gaia gave birth to the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants, and the Centimanes, creatures with 100 hands each, Uranus found them ugly, too different, too powerful. So he imprisoned them in Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, where they suffered in darkness and chains. Gaia, watching her children suffer, could bear her husband's cruelty no longer. She forged an adamantine sickle from the hardest materials in creation and asked her children who would help her overthrow Uranus. Only Cronus volunteered. Greek texts describe the ambush with visceral detail. Gaia created a hiding place for Cronus, while Uranus descended to couple with her, as he did every night, his massive form covering the earth. At the moment of vulnerability, when Uranus was distracted and exposed, Cronus emerged from hiding and castrated his father with the sickle, severing his divine genitals and casting them into the sea. Uranus, grievously wounded and unmanned, retreated to the farthest reaches of the sky, never to descend again. Cronus claimed the throne and began his reign as king of the Titans. For a time, he ruled over what Greeks called the Golden Age, a period of peace, prosperity, and happiness for both gods and mortals. The earth produced abundant food without need for labor. Humans lived in harmony without war or conflict. It was paradise under Cronus's rule. But Cronus couldn't forget how he'd gained his throne, by overthrowing his father. And Uranus's final words, spoken as he fled bleeding to the heavens, became a prophecy that would haunt Cronus's every moment. As you have done to me, so shall your own children do to you. This prophecy transformed Cronus from a hero who freed his siblings and established a golden age into a monster consumed by paranoid fear. When he married his sister Rhea and she became pregnant with their first child, the prophecy dominated his thoughts, invaded his dreams, corrupted every happy moment with anxiety. A son could overthrow him just as he'd overthrown Uranus. The cycle would repeat. He would become the tyrant he'd deposed. Everything he'd built would be destroyed. His reign would end. He would be cast down, possibly imprisoned, definitely humiliated. The prophecy didn't specify when or how, which made it worse. Any moment could be the moment. Any child could be the one. Constant vigilance could never truly protect him, because the threat was inherent in having children at all. But Cronus devised a solution that reveals the depths of his evil, the extremes of his paranoid selfishness. When Rhea gave birth to their daughter Hestia, Cronus demanded to hold the newborn. Instead of cradling his child, instead of feeling parental love or protective instinct, he opened his mouth impossibly wide and swallowed her whole, alive, fully conscious, trapped inside her father's divine body. Imagine that horror. Being born, taking your first breaths, seeing your mother's face, then being lifted by your father, who opens his mouth and the world goes dark and wet and you're falling into his throat and then trapped in his stomach, alive but imprisoned in darkness inside the body of the one who should protect you. Rhea screamed in horror, begging him to stop, to reconsider, offering any alternative. But Cronus was already calculating. The prophecy specified a son would overthrow him. Hestia was a daughter, so technically not the prophesied threat, but daughters could bear sons who might fulfill the prophecy. Better to eliminate all possibilities. As long as no child could grow to challenge him, he remained safe. And children trapped inside him couldn't possibly rebel. They couldn't grow, couldn't learn, couldn't plan, couldn't act. They would remain forever suspended in the moment of their infancy, conscious but helpless, alive but imprisoned. So when Rhea bore their second daughter, Demeter, Cronus devoured her. Then their third daughter, Hera. Then their first son, Hades. Then their second son, Poseidon. 5 children, all swallowed alive to prevent a prophecy. Each time, Rhea begged him to stop. Each time, he refused, his paranoia stronger than any parental instinct or marital love. Each time, another child disappeared into darkness inside their father's body. Rhea's grief transformed into desperate determination to save at least one child. When she became pregnant with their 6th child, Zeus, she conspired with Gaia, Cronus's mother, to hide the birth. They chose the island of Crete, a distant location where Cronus rarely traveled. In a secret cave on Mount Ida, Rhea delivered Zeus in absolute secrecy. She immediately gave him to nymphs to raise, with instructions to keep him hidden, to train him, to prepare him for the day he would fulfill the prophecy by overthrowing his father. Then Rhea executed her deception. She wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes, bundling it to look and feel like a baby. She presented it to Cronus, claiming this was their newest son. In his paranoid haste, without even looking closely, without checking whether this was actually a child or questioning why his wife seemed less devastated than usual, Cronus swallowed the stone whole. He felt it settle in his stomach with his other children and considered himself safe for another generation. Years passed. Decades. Zeus grew to adulthood in hiding, raised by nymphs in the Cretan cave, trained in combat and strategy, learning everything he could about his father. The Titanomachy, the war between Titans and Olympians, was being planned. Zeus knew he couldn't defeat Cronus alone. He needed allies. And the most powerful potential allies were his own siblings, still alive inside Cronus's body. When Zeus finally felt ready, he approached his father disguised as a cupbearer, a servant beneath notice. He offered Cronus a drink, wine mixed with a powerful emetic potion created by the goddess Métis, who would later become Zeus's first wife. Cronus drank deeply, suspecting nothing, trusting that no servant would dare poison the king of the universe. The potion forced his divine body to violently reject everything he'd swallowed. First came the stone Rhea had substituted. Then came Zeus's siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. They emerged fully grown despite years trapped in darkness. They had been conscious the entire time, aware but suspended, experiencing the horror of imprisonment inside their father's body for decades. They emerged ready for war, armed with justified rage, united by shared trauma and the singular purpose of overthrowing the monster who had devoured them. The Titanomachy that followed lasted 10 years. Titans loyal to Cronus fought against the Olympians led by Zeus. The war nearly destroyed creation itself. Mountains were used as weapons, seas boiled from divine fire. The earth itself cracked from the force of gods in combat. Eventually, Zeus and his siblings won. They imprisoned Cronus in Tartarus, the same place Uranus had imprisoned the Cyclopes and Cendamanes, creating a poetic justice where Cronus experienced the same imprisonment he'd inflicted on others. But the cycle of violence didn't end. Zeus learned from his father's mistakes. He didn't swallow his children, but he did consume his pregnant wife Métis when he heard a prophecy that her son would overthrow him, causing Athena to be born from his head. The pattern of fathers fearing sons, of power corrupting relationships, of prophecies creating the very problems they predict through attempts to prevent them. This continued through generations. Cronus represents the evil of absolute power combined with absolute fear. He had everything, a throne, a kingdom, a golden age, a family, and destroyed it all because he couldn't tolerate any threat to his position. His story asks disturbing questions. What would you sacrifice to keep power? How far would you go to prevent your own downfall? Would you destroy what you love to keep what you have? The image of Cronus devouring his children became one of Western art's most powerful symbols, painted by Rubens and most famously by Goya in Saturn devouring his son, a horrifying image of the Titan consuming a child's corpse. But the ancient myth is somehow worse because the children weren't dead. They were alive inside him, conscious, trapped, suffering, but unable to die. That particular horror, being imprisoned inside the body of your own father, alive but helpless, aware but unable to act, represents a psychological nightmare that resonates across cultures and centuries. Cronus shows us that evil doesn't always come from outside, from chaos or disorder or forces opposed to creation. Sometimes evil comes from those in power who love their power more than anything else, who will sacrifice their children, destroy their families, and undermine their own legacy to avoid losing control. Sometimes the monster isn't the revolutionary trying to overthrow the system. Sometimes the monster is the system itself, consuming its own offspring to prevent change, eating the future to preserve the present, choosing death over succession. The final lesson of Cronus is this: prophesied doom becomes inevitable not despite efforts to prevent it, but because of those efforts. If Cronus had raised his children with love, if he'd treated them as allies rather than threats, the prophecy might never have been fulfilled. But by trying to prevent it through violence and fear, he guaranteed his children would hate him, would unite against him, would overthrow him at the first opportunity. His evil created the very circumstances it feared. His cruelty generated the revenge it tried to prevent. In trying to escape destiny, he ran directly into it. From the Persian deserts to the Greek mountains, from Egyptian temples to Maori islands, from Mesopotamian cities to Norse halls, we've journeyed through humanity's darkest mythological visions. These weren't just stories to frighten children around campfires. They were sophisticated attempts to understand and explain the reality of suffering, evil, and chaos in our universe. Angra Mainyu taught us that evil can be a conscious, deliberate choice rather than ignorance or corruption. Apophis showed us the terror of entropy and uncreation, the forces that want to return everything to primordial chaos. Kali revealed that destruction and creation are inseparable, that the same forces that protect can become threats when taken too far. Set proved that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family, that those who should love us can become our murderers. Loki demonstrated that cleverness without morality leads to catastrophe, that the friend who helps can become the enemy who destroys everything. Lamashtu embodied our worst fears for our most vulnerable, the predator that hunts our children specifically, making tragedy personal rather than random. Whiro explained that evil emerges from the first moment of creation itself, that darkness is the necessary shadow cast by light. Eris showed how small actions cascade into massive destruction, how petty revenge can trigger world-ending wars. Hera proved that institutional power and moral goodness aren't the same, that those who present as protectors can simultaneously be predators. And Cronus revealed that power corrupts completely, that even family bonds dissolve when maintaining control becomes more important than anything else. What strikes us across all these myths is a disturbing pattern. Almost every culture independently decided that the divine realm included beings of pure malevolence. These weren't accidents of creation or unfortunate mistakes. They were fundamental forces that would exist as long as the universe itself existed. Some, like Apophis and Whiro, emerged from the structure of reality itself. Others, like Angra Mainyu and Loki, made conscious choices to embrace destruction. Still others, like Hera and Set, became evil through pain, jealousy, and resentment that festered into cruelty. But perhaps the most disturbing realization is this: humans across all cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all agreed that evil is real, powerful, intelligent, and eternal. Whether they called it Angra Mainyu or Apophis or Whiro, whether they depicted it as a serpent, a demon, or a dark god, the fundamental insight remained the same. There are forces in existence that want to harm us, corrupt us, destroy us. And these forces aren't going away. They're as permanent as creation itself. So here's my question to you. Why do you think every human civilization created stories about evil gods? What does that tell us about ourselves, about the human condition, about the nature of existence? Is evil something external that threatens us from outside, or is it something internal that we project outward in the form of mythological beings? Are these gods metaphors for human psychology, or are they humanity's attempt to understand forces we genuinely encounter? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which of these evil gods disturbs you most and why. Tell me if you think evil is real or just a human construct. Tell me your own culture's stories about dark gods and malevolent forces. And if you found this journey through mythology's dark side fascinating, if you want to explore more of humanity's most disturbing beliefs and ancient wisdom, subscribe to this channel because next time, we're exploring something even more shocking: the forbidden rituals ancient priests performed to protect themselves from these very gods. Ceremonies so disturbing that some cultures tried to erase all knowledge of them. We're talking about human sacrifice, blood magic, invocations that could supposedly summon demons, and protective spells that required acts most people would consider evil. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Until then, remember, the gods may be myths, but the lessons they teach about human nature, about power and corruption, about fear and courage, about the eternal struggle between creation and destruction, those lessons are very, very real. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.